I'm going to stand up, maybe. Yes. Yes, I will.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, welcome, everyone. What a joy to see you. I mean, I just feel invigorated every time our little meeting gets together. It's lovely to have you. The power of stories is just wonderful. I've been walking around for the last week telling myself how fine I am, how healthy I am, how grateful I am, how wonderful the days are. I mean, I talk to myself all the time telling stories. And then I think of you all. And our library will open April the 26th, and I am going to go over there very soon and talk to the head librarian and remind her that we are part of her program and her tradition, and make sure that we have a space when they open for meetings and things like that. So I'm so glad to see you. Let's give a big clapping for Liz and Marnie, because without them, you wouldn't have a swap tonight. So take it away, ladies, and thank you very much.
Hi, I think there's some people here that I've never met anyway. So I'm Liz Nichols, and I'm Sally's other half when we're in person. We co-host, and Marnie, Marnie, wave to everybody so everybody knows who you are. If you're having any, Marnie has stepped up as someone who's been coming to our swap to help us with our tech, to be our tech host. And so I can't say enough. Thank you. Thank you. Let's have everybody mute yourself. Let's all mute ourselves, except me right now. And we've got a lot of great storytellers this evening, so we're just going to get started, and we're going to go from one to the next. And our first storyteller tonight is Rupa Mohan. And so please, Rupa and I tell stories together at the Asian Art Museum. That's one cool fact I know about Rupa. Please welcome Rupa. Tell us a story.
Greetings, everyone. I'd like to take you back to a time, one day in particular, when I was in the 7th grade, and our class was abuzz with excitement because a new student had stepped in. Not a regular student, she was a foreigner, a Japanese, in fact, and her name was Hitomi Hata. And we had not really encountered a Japanese person. This was in Chennai, or Madras as it was known. And this was the first time we even had a foreigner come into our class. So we were all very excited, and we were hovering around her, trying to get acquainted with her. The thing is, Hitomi didn't know a word of English. And she had beautiful black hair, a flawless complexion, and she set up her desk in the front of the class where the nuns wanted her to sit. She had the most beautiful stationery. We had never seen such a lovely pencil case with animals on top of it. She had a beautiful Schaefer pen. She had lovely pencils, and of course, erasers that not only looked good, but they smelled so great. You see, in India those days, we believed in be Indian, buy Indian. So we were not really exposed to all these foreign goods. Sometimes they would be available in the smugglers' markets, but often they were like fakes. So we looked at all her stuff and we couldn't believe what we were seeing. Hitomi had a very calm demeanor, a nice smile on her face, and she quietly adapted to our classroom. I don't think she understood what the teachers were talking about, but she sat patiently. When it came to math, though, she was on top of it. She would work out those math problems way ahead of us, very neatly writing with her lead pencil, and the teachers would applaud her. Of course, we were also very fascinated by the fact that she would read from top to bottom, not side to side like us. And we thought that was something so cool. Well, Hitomi needed a lunch buddy, and I volunteered to be her lunch companion. all of us at that stage prefer to eat outdoors under the trees, despite the humid weather, despite having to sit on the mud. But Hitomi, of course, didn't want to do that. And I went with her to the lunchroom. The lunchroom was buzzing with activity. The kids, all the young kids were seated there making a noise, chattering, opening their boxes and beating their utensils. And Hitomi pointed to a table way back. And both of us went there and sat down. Well, she pulled out her lunchbox. That was another beauty. It had like a pink case with animal comic figures on top. And she opened it very coolly and pulled out a thermos. She took out the thermos, the little cup on top, and she poured something green from it. I had never seen that. It smelled so different from anything I had encountered. On the other hand, I took out my Indian tiffin carrier, a three-tiered case with a spoon on top, and I opened it up and I set up and I had just a regular water bottle by my side. As Hitomi started sipping this beverage, I tried not to be very curious and focus on my own lunch. Then she opened up her real lunch, and there were these rolls, something rolled in green. Looked like it was a leaf of some kind. But what I noticed from the side of my eye was there was rice in it. That I knew because I was a big rice eater myself. So while I was digging into my rice and lentils and vegetables, Hitomi with her chopsticks was elegantly eating these balls. We didn't have to talk at all because there was this big language barrier between us. But we just sat there and we ate. And this went on for a few months. And I should have asked her, somehow tried to communicate with her. I should have asked her about her life in Japan, about her family. I mean, so many things were there that I was curious about. But I thought it could wait until Hitomi learned, some basic English and I could actually communicate with her. But unfortunately, that never happened because very soon Hitomi had to go back to Japan. Her father, who was a diplomat, had decided to go back. And soon we received this invitation to her farewell party. I remember it was a very rainy evening. The monsoon was on its way, and we all went to Hitomi's house. And it was a beautiful big bungalow in a very posh part of Madras. And we went in, we took off our slippers, which were wet from the rain. We left them outside, which the Japanese appreciate as well. And her mother greeted us, the nice smile, and she welcomed us, though she had not picked up much English as well. But she had this big spread there with all kinds of delicacies, chocolates, pastries, chips, snacks, nothing Japanese, but these were really top-notch treats, especially Campa Cola, which was like Coca-Cola. And it was a very occasional, luxurious treat for all of us. We enjoyed the beautiful spread, and Hitomi went around smiling and nodding while we all chatted like anything. And her mother brought out Hitomi's things, like, like a little farewell gift for all of us, something to remember her by. There were those pencils, there was the lunchbox, there were even her roller skates, there was even her beautiful Schaefer pen. But I was a little shy, and before I knew it, the smart girls went and they helped themselves to all that. I should have got that lunchbox, but I didn't. There was one thing left in the corner, and I shyly approached it and I picked it up. It was a box, and we soon said goodbye to her. Hitomi and her mother bowed to us and we did namaste. I think both our cultures where we were not comfortable about hugging each other. And soon it was time to say goodbye. And we went back home. When I went home with that box, my little sisters came running to me. They wanted to know what it was. And we excitedly opened it. It was a board game. But it was all in Japanese. Could not understand a word of it. We never figured out how to play it. And it sat in my mother's storage room, literally gathering dust for many, many years. But it did remind me about Hitomi. Not only that, now when I eat sushi and drink green tea, and look at little kitties everywhere, I am reminded of Hitomi and this lovely young Japanese girl who, in a very short time, had made such an impression on me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rupa, for that lovely memory. Cross-cultural connections, very dear, very important. All right. Now we're going to bring on our featured storyteller for this evening, and that's Ed Silberman. And I asked Ed, what should I say about you? And he said to say that he tells stories that can draw laughs or ahas or touch deep feelings. And he likes storytelling for the power of the voice. And Ed has a very wonderful voice. And he uses it for storytelling, for singing, for playing the harmonica. He's involved in every aspect of folk everything in the Bay Area. And I first met you, Ed, through the Bay Area Storytelling Festival. We were both on the volunteer planning committee for that for many years. But if you've gone to the Storytelling Festival, which sadly is no more, and you enjoyed not only that we got to hear amazing stories, but that in between them, we got to refresh our minds, our souls, our ears with beautiful, all kinds of different music. That's thanks to Ed. So Ed, we all really, you've added so much. And Ed has come to our swap before and often told traditional stories, but today he has a personal story to share that really speaks to this season and this time. And so please, Ed, let's all welcome Ed.
Thank you, Liz. You forgot to mention that I'm eligible for marriage. Am I on? Okay, I am. Okay. So, as Liz said, I usually tell folk tales. But tonight, 2 out of the 3 stories I planned are from my own life. I like to say they're factual stories. I don't like that phrase, true story. Is that a true story? I never answer that question if I can get away with it, because all stories are true. If they didn't deal with truth, they wouldn't exist. Some of the truth is found in facts, and some of the truth is found in fiction, in imagination. But it's all truth. So don't ask me again. These are all factual. So, well, 2 of the spoken stories I'm going to tell are factual stories. And the first is from sitting in the waiting room at the doctor's office and sitting next to a Black woman with the biggest Mogen David on her chest I have ever seen. Mogen David, Star of David, the 6-pointed star that a lot of Jews wear as an identifier. Now, up to that time in my life, I had only met one Black Jew, and he and I were waiting for a crossing signal to change. And we talked a little bit, but as soon as the light changed, our relationship was over. This is my experience with Black Jews, and I wasn't sure quite what to do. People say you don't talk about the religion with strangers, but I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it and I decided to bite the bullet. And I turned to her and I said, "Are you Jewish?" And she said, "No, but my Savior is." Well, I thought that was a fabulous answer, and I told her that. And just as I was saying that, a Muslim woman walks into the room wearing a long dress all the way down to her ankles, long sleeves, a scarf around her hair, and carrying a book about understanding the Quran. I didn't need to ask her if she was Muslim. So she walks into the room, and I take one look at her, one look at this other woman, and I say, would you get a load of that? We've got the whole monotheistic triumvirate right here. A Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian. And there was another guy in the waiting room who looked up from his magazine and said, and you didn't even have to walk into a bar. And we stayed in touch for some time. Both those women and I were friendly for a good while. So the black woman finally went back to New Orleans. She was a Katrina refugee. So as Liz said, I'm going to be telling stories today appropriate to the season. And I don't mean spring, I mean Pesach, Passover, the season of redemption for Jews. And this song relates to that. On Egypt's banks, contagious to the Nile, one of Pharaoh's daughters went out to bathe in style. She took her dip and she went onto the strand, and to dry her royal pelt she ran along the land. She ran into the bulrushes, whereupon she saw a smiling babby in a wad of straw. She picks up the child and she gives an accent, and she says in accents mild, Tyrannage's daughters, a witch owns a child. Tittery out, tell, tittery out and tell, tittery out and tay, tittery out, tittery out and tell, tittery out and tay. She picks up the babby and she gives a little grin. For she and little Moses were standing in the skin. The dad says it was someone very rude to go and leave a babby in the river in the nude. She goes down to her old She goes down to her old Das sitting on his throne. Das says she, won't you give the child a home? Sure, says he, it's often brought in worse. So go, me darling daughter, and fetch the child a nurse. Tittery out, tell, tittery out and tell, tittery out and tay, tittery out, tell, tittery out and tell, tittery out and tay. So they sent a bellman to the market square to see if he could find a shivvy there. But the only girl that he could find was the little dear one that left the child behind. And so she went down to the Pharaoh, a stranger Maria, and ever letting on that she was the Bobby's ma. And so little Moses got his mummy back, which shows the coincidence is a nut to crack. Tittery out, tell, tittery out and tell, tittery out and say, tittery out, tell, tittery out and tell, tittery out and say. The Finding of Moses. Now, there's a lot of debate in scholarly circles about just where that story comes from. Some say it's an Irish song. Well, it is a storytelling song. Some say it's an Irish song because of the form and the style. Some say it's a Jewish song because it's about Moses. I finally figured it out. It's a Jewish story. And the way you can tell is that one word in the last line, coincidence. There's your proof. So I need to put on the storytelling hat for this story. Some stories just call for a hat. I dropped my storytelling hat. Well, that isn't good. So I won't use the storytelling hat. It was my very first trip to Israel. And I was in my brother's apartment in Jerusalem. He was talking on the telephone. And when he put down the phone, he said, I'm going down to the coastal area to meet somebody. Do you want to come along? Well, in the day and a half I'd been in Israel, the coastal area was about the only thing I hadn't seen yet. So I said, sure. And we got in his car, we drove down to the coastal area, found a small suburban shopping mall, strip mall, and we pulled into the parking lot. And there, standing next to her car, was Eliana Gilead, another American Jew who immigrated to Israel. After the usual how do you do's and nice to meet yous, how was your flight? We started to talking about what we wanted to do. Eliana was the only one who knew that area. So she said, we've got a boutique cafe, we've got an art gallery, and there's the Arab village called Tira. And the choice was given to me since I was the visitor. Well, where I come from, Berkeley, California, we have lots of boutique cafes, more than we need. We have art galleries, probably not quite enough. What we are in desperately short supply of is Arab villages by the name of Tira or anything else. So I voted to go to Tira. We got in her car and we drove down the highway until she pulled onto a side road. And from there, she pulled onto a gravel road. And we traveled down the gravel road for a while until it became a dirt road that was surrounded on either side by greenhouses. Just going through a tunnel of greenhouses as far as the eye could see, there was nothing but greenhouses. And I thought to myself, Toto, we have left the big city far behind. And soon the gravel road became a dirt road, and the greenhouses disappeared, and it was just nothing but barren landscape. And finally, I turned to Eliana and I said, if you clearly feel comfortable coming to this Arab village, and if you feel comfortable, I feel comfortable. But how is it that you feel comfortable? She said, first, don't let the Intifada scare you. It's really a big media event. Oh, it's for real, don't get me wrong. People have gotten killed. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of it is done for the cameras. I used to work for CBS in France. And one day I made a bet with my coworker that every item that came through in the next half hour was going to be about blood. And I was wrong. 2 items came through that weren't about blood. Everything else was. The media thrives on blood the way our bodies thrive on blood. And the Intifada organizers know it. Oh. She said, I'll tell you something else too. I used to have a business making sandwiches for people in office buildings. And the Tira Bakery supplied my bread. I closed up the business a long time ago, but I still keep in touch with them. And we've become very good friends over the years. So I thought about that for a little bit. And we drove down the dirt road through the barren wilderness and finally took a left turn into an unpaved parking lot just off the unpaved streets of Tira and right in front of the Tira Bakery. When we went inside, the owner of the Tira Bakery couldn't be more happy to see Eliana. There were hugs and kisses and whoops of joy. You would think they were long lost cousins who hadn't seen each other for years, rather than good acquaintances who hadn't talked for months. All the conversation was in Hebrew, but it didn't matter. I could feel the love these two had for each other, rolling across the room. And the owner, now, as it happens, this was in the middle of Pesach, the holiday when Jews cannot eat unleavened bread. We were only allowed to eat the dry, tasteless stuff called matzah. Now, my brother Steve is not a religious Jew. Steve couldn't care less about not eating unleavened bread for 3 days, for 7 days. I don't know where I got that number from. 8 days to be technical. Well, this is Israel, so it's 7 days, never mind. Jewish technicalities. He couldn't care less about eating matzah, except that living in Jerusalem, The only place where he could get matzah was in neighborhoods he was not comfortable going into. So he walked right up to the counter and said, I'm going to have 2 of those and 3 of those and 2 of those, and got himself 3 big bags of bread to carry back to Jerusalem. The fellow behind the counter bagged them up, and the owner of the cafe said, don't charge them. Of the bakery said, don't charge them. They're friends. Steve walked back to the table with his 3 bags of bread. The owner said, would you like any? Well, I really didn't need any bread after what Steve was bringing home, but it seemed like a hard offer to turn down. So I said, sure. And I walked to the counter and ordered 3 rolls. And she said, don't charge, friends. And I came back to the table. When it was time to leave, she said, do you like sweets? I said, yeah. She went into the back and she made a huge bag of pastries, of Danish and donuts and cookies and rugla, every imaginable kind of sweet you could want. And she gave it to me free of charge. We walked out to the car and we put the bags of pastries in the car and walked across the street to the Tira Cafe, where we had some of the best ground lamb and hummus you could ever imagine. It even impressed my brother, and he eats that kind of food all the time. And as we were eating, I found out that Eliana used to live in Berkeley. And she used to be active in the Berkeley folk dance scene. She used to go to Ashkenaz. Now, if you are aware of the Berkeley folk dance scene, you don't need to be told that Ashkenaz is a venerable, maybe I can say near legendary dance house in North Berkeley. They have all kinds of dancing there. Cajun, salsa, square dancing, you name it, at one time or another, it happens at Ashkenaz. And the fellow who made sure that was the case was David Nadell, the owner of the Ashkenaz, and a beloved character around Berkeley. There was hardly anybody who didn't know David, either through folk dancing or his political activity. And we had a lot of friends in common. We started playing folk dance geography. Do you know this person? And do you know that person? And whatever happened to so-and-so? And were you in Berkeley when these 2 were there? And boy, I wish you were still around when these 2 were there. You would have liked them. And then Ileana said, I heard that David Nadell committed suicide. Well, this took me back a little bit, because I knew what happened to David Nadell. And I knew that he had not committed suicide. And I knew I had to tell Ileana what happened, what really happened. And I wasn't quite sure how to do it. I said, Ileana, it wasn't exactly like that. There was a fella in Ashkenaz, I think it was a Cajun night maybe. There was a fella there who was acting kind of rowdy and pestering some other people in the crowd. And David had to walk up to him and ask him to keep his behavior in line. And he did. He was a perfect gentleman for a while, but then he got revved up again and he started bothering people again, started harassing people again. And David had to approach him and say, sir, that's not the way we act when we come into Ashkenaz. Can you keep it in line, please? And he did for a while. But then the juices started to boil and he was up to his old tricks, and David had to approach him and say, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're not appropriate for Ashkenaz. And he escorted the man out the door, and the man got in his car and he drove away into the night. And a half an hour later, he came back with a gun. And he met David at the door and he pointed the gun right at his head and he shot David Nadell. A friend of mine was there that night. He stopped at my house on the way home and told me what he saw. He said, David is in Highland Hospital right now, fighting for his life. The next day, all I could do is tune into the radio to see if there was any news at all. And finally, I found out that David Nadell did not get out of Highland Hospital. He lost his fight. And that's what happened to David Nadell. When she heard me tell her this, A cloud came over Ileana's face. The color drained from her cheeks. The color drained from her eyes. And she couldn't say anything at all. She was speechless for a few minutes. And then, when she finally spoke, she said, and there are people who are afraid to come to Kira.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you got something good out of that.
Yes, that was a very important story. Also cross-cultural story.
Mhm.
And one that makes us look at ourselves the way we need to be looking at ourselves as a country right now, for sure. So thank you. Okay, let's take a breath, stretch for a minute, and get ready for our next storyteller, who is also coming to us cross-culturally, cross-geographically, all the way from India, Renu Narayan. This is her second time to tell us a story. Please, yeah, you're unmuted. Okay, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. Namaste and a very, very warm good evening to you all, though it's morning here. So not far away and not long ago, there was a tree in a small garden. Not a very tall tree, not a very broad tree, but a strong, sturdy tree. She was a mango tree. It was just the beginning of summer, and she was covered with lots and lots of flowers. The mango season was on. And one morning, when the little girl who lived in that house came running out, she looked at the tree and said, "Mama, Mama, come here." And her mother came out. She said, "Look, Mama, there are so many tiny little mangoes on our tree." And her mother smiled and said, "Yes, looks like we're going to have plenty of mangoes this year." But 2 nights later, there was a huge storm. Gale winds were blowing so strongly. Woo, woo, they went right through the night. All the trees were shaking and shivering like they were in a frenzy. And then the rain came down. The storm stopped finally only in the morning. Everything looked fresh and green, and the warm fragrance of petrichor was in the air. But when that little girl, Seema, came out, she didn't smell anything. She could only see. And she shouted, "Mama, come here." And when her mother came out, she said, "Look, Mama, all those tiny little mangoes were there on the ground." "Oh dear," said her mother. "Looks like we are not going to get any mangoes this year." Now, unknown to them, right on top of the tree, hidden among some leaves, there was one tiny little mango. And she said to her mother, "Mama, I want to stay with you always. I don't want to fall down." And Mama Tree said, "My little Ambi," that was the little mango's name, "you cannot stay with me forever. You're tiny now, but as the days go on, you'll become bigger and bigger. You'll be a big green mango. But after some time, you will turn yellow and you'll be ripe and sweet. And that's when the squirrels and the birds will come to eat you up." "But Mama, that will hurt, won't it?" "Remember, Ambi, what's inside you, the seed, that's what's important. And one day you'll grow into a big tree just like." And that's exactly what happened. As the days and the weeks went by, Ambi grew bigger and bigger. Soon she was a big green mango. Then she turned into a ripe, juicy mango. The birds came, the squirrels came. And when she was half eaten, tup, 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 she fell onto the ground. And then she thought, looks like I'm going to grow right here next to Mama. But she didn't know that there was a dog in that house who loved mangoes. And when the dog came bounding out, she picked up that mango, went running to the driveway, and was enjoying the mango. Suddenly, she heard someone calling her, so she ran inside the house. And Ambi lay there thinking, this ground is so hard. How will I ever go inside and grow? Just then, a crow came flying down, picked up the mango, and flew. She flew and then sat on a tree far away. She finished eating up that mango, and the seed fell down into rich, moist soil. The seed went in deep. It was dark, it was lonely, and it was silent. But Ambi remembered her mother's words as she lay there for days on end. And one day, a root came out, and then a shoot came out, and went up and up and up, and came out of the soil. And she could feel the warm sun, the gentle breeze, and there was a drizzle falling down. Ambi was happy. She started to grow, and she grew, and there were fresh leaves, the light green, light purple, and she felt wonderful. But seasons changed. It was summer. The sun was hot and scorching, and Ambi's leaves started to shrivel up. She longed for some rain, but no. Day after day after day, the sun burned down on her, and she thought, this is the end. But one day she heard a voice. Look, look, Rani, we've never seen this before, but it looks like a mango sapling. Who called Mama? So their mother came out and she said, yes, this is a mango sapling. But all the leaves are dry, but I think there is still some life. Rani, go fetch some water. So Rani brought the water. She poured it on to Ambi. And Ambi felt so good. That cool water flowing down and then making the soil around her so moist. She had been so thirsty all these days. And day after day after day, the girls continued to water her. Fresh manure was put in, and Ambi continued to grow. She had lots and lots and lots of leaves once again, and she thought to herself, like Mama said, I'm going to grow into a big, strong tree, exactly like Mama. This is my home, and I'm going to stay here forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renu. I haven't eaten a mango in a long time, but I'm going out and I hope I can get a good one. Thank you.
Our mango tree has got lots of flowers now.
Ah, well, if you could just put it through the Zoom screen.
Why not?
But we got you. We might not be able to have your mango, but we got to have you all the way from India. It's a miracle. It's really a miracle. And thank you so much for making this trip. All right. Our next storyteller is Jane Cole. And Marnie?
Jane seems to have disappeared.
Oh, has Jane disappeared?
Just as
I announced her?
yeah,
Yeah.
about 30 seconds before. So Jane,
right.
are you there? No. Oh, is her name under some other name?
Well, I thought we had changed it. It was Steve
had.
Morrow, but
We had, yeah. Let's see.
yeah.
If it came back on as Morrow. Nope, she didn't. Okay.
Okay. So,
So
Beverly, how are you?
Are you ready?
If Beverly, if you
ready.
are ready, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I just have to get, what do you call it? Down there, spotlighted, okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Take it away, Beverly, all the way from Albany, New York.
Right.
Thanks to
Well,
Ed.
yeah, the governor is right down the road sleeping in his mansion, what's his name? Cuomo, you might have heard of him lately. Okay, okay. I taught third grade in Troy, New York, and was an administrator for elementary schools. The phone went off. I don't know why. Okay.
That was me, my mistake. I'm sorry.
Okay, I thought it was my phone. I'm looking around, but I don't see it. Yeah. Okay, so in 1985, started developing a hands-on science program with the collaboration of the local college, students, professors, and area professionals in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math. I called the program STEM. No one had ever used it before, and I was the first one to call a program like that STEM. Well, the state came in, they saw what I did, and they asked me to apply for the 1990 Christy McAuliffe Award, which honored Christy McAuliffe, which was the first teacher in space that unfortunately passed away when the rocket ship exploded. And I applied and I won. I couldn't believe it. First thing I really won in my life. And they sent an astronaut to my school. We blasted off rocket ships we had made. He talked to the school and he said, Bev, we're going to be sending you down for an award ceremony at the Kennedy Space Center. And when I get there, I'm going to meet you, he said. And I have a favor I'm going to ask you then. He wouldn't tell me. When I got down there, I walked in the room and the astronaut saw me and came right over to me. He said, Bev, I need you to sit with this person, Grace, who was Christy McAuliffe's mother. And this is the very first time she's back to the Kennedy Space Center since her daughter passed away. I'd like you to eat lunch and stay with her. And afterwards, I'm going to come over to you and see if both of you would like to join me on a private tour at the Kennedy Space. I'm so excited. She was kind of a quiet, reserved woman, and we had a nice lunch. And after lunch, the astronaut came over and he said, follow me, ladies, we're going to have a special tour. And off we went. We saw a lot of different things, but he did do told us two funny things that happened. He said, you see that igloo, like a half circle building that was white, and next to a rocket ship a little further down. He said, this was the first command center when we tested rocket ships at Kennedy Space Center. Now, we're going to give you a tour, and this is where the controls were to try to blast off the rocket ships. Some worked and some exploded, and eventually we were successful to have the type of space, ships we have today. He said, notice, when you're going into this igloo, we called it, there was a men's room and there was a woman's room. And in those days, we didn't know when we blasted off these rocket ships, there would be fuel that was acidic, very acidy, and it could burn you. So we didn't know how many minutes we had to stay in the igloo before we could get hurt or finally get out. So we locked the doors for 48 hours. No one could get in and no one could get out. So we went in and he said, the first time we blasted off a rocket ship, the doors were locked. And about a couple hours later, someone had to go to the bathroom. And he said, where were the bathrooms? And I said, they were outside. They were locked, the doors. They couldn't get out. He said, you're right. Those were the engineers designing our spaceships. We all laughed. I guess they had to make do. Then he said, look out the window from the igloo. See that rocket ship? In those days, we had to connect the rocket ships to the igloo with extension cords. Oh, that wasn't really high tech, I thought. He said, and during the blast off, we had Squirrel Man. And he said, Squirrel Man's job was to watch and make sure the little squirrels didn't loosen up the extension cords so the rocket ship could be blasted off. And one day, 20, 19, 18, and all of a sudden, when everyone shouted, squirrel! And the guy ran out, plugged it in, got back just in time for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the rocket ship blasted off. So those were the type of things we saw. But then he said, we got into the van again at one point, and he said, I have something very special for you guys. we're going to be able to stand on the launch pad where your daughter's rocket ship blasted off. I saw her get a little tense, and she was kind of holding her hands in front of her. We drove in silence up to the space launch pad. We got out and we walked up this big cement ramp. It was very windy. And we finally reached the launch pad. And the three of us looked up because there was a window in that spaceship. And that's what we would have seen right before we would have blasted off. Now, my superintendent, when I was doing my program, was so impressed, he called me to his office. And I said to myself, oh no, what did I do wrong? And he handed me an application. And he said, you know, they're looking for a teacher who might want to go up in space. I thought you'd be the perfect person. Please apply, Bev. And I took the application and put it on my kitchen table. And I had 5 cats and a dog. And I let it sit for 2 weeks. Why was I not filling it out? Because I did not want to leave my cats and dog to be motherless and something happened. And I did not want to die in space. So I never told anyone that I didn't fill it out. No one ever asked me. They just assumed I did and didn't get picked. And next to me was Mrs. McAuliffe's mother, Grace. Her daughter had the courage to not only fill out that application, but leave a husband, 2 kids, her parents, her community, and was willing to take that risk to be the first teacher in space. I looked at Mrs. McAuliffe's mother, Grace. You could tell she had some tears coming down her face. She was now holding herself like this and looking up. And I bent over and said, would you like a few minutes up here alone, Grace? All she could do was nod. Take your time, I said. We'll meet you down at the ramp. So the astronaut and I walked slowly down. And when I got to the bottom, I turned around and looked up. And there was Grace. She was talking to her daughter, wiping the tears. You can see her mouth moving. I was wondering what she was saying to her daughter. I said, I wonder if she's saying the goodbye she never had because the daughter blasted off and was killed instantly. There was no time to say goodbye. About 20 minutes later, after watching her, she turned around and she walked slowly down the ramp and towards me. As she approached me, she stared right into my eyes. I got a little scared. I said, I hope she's okay. And as she got to me, she gave me the biggest mother hug you could ever imagine. When she let go, I realized she had finally said goodbye to her daughter. I took her hand and we turned around and we walked away in silence. It was a moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Please come tell us more stories. Keep coming back. Thanks
I
so
will.
much.
I would love to. Thank you very
wonderful.
much for allowing me to enter your group. I feel very
Ah,
welcome, especially after my emergency, you know, and how nice you were about understanding.
no problem. No problem. And our next storyteller was going to go before you, except she had some kind of Zoom thing. But I think, Jane, I saw you come back in. So let's see if we can find Jane. If Marnie could spotlight her. I hope she's still here.
I am.
Oh, good.
Okay.
So just
we're not-
hang on.
So we're not going to do it. Okay, so Jane.
Yeah, let's,
Am I good to go?
the spotlight is still on me, so. By the way, everybody, this is being recorded, the entire thing. So number one, yeah, so if you missed any part, you'll get, you can ask us if you don't know how to go on the Storytelling Association of California YouTube channel. We can help you figure out how to do that, and you can watch everything. So Jane, welcome. We're glad you made it back. Jane
Thank
always
you.
has some adventure or other to share with us. So what is it this time?
Well, just about this time of the year, when I was a little girl, I would run home from school, throw off my school clothes, which at that time had to be a dress, throw on my cutoff Levi's and my white kids, which were stained with mud, and my sweatshirt, run to the garage, grab my bridle, grab a paper bag, put some omoline in it, which is a kind of oat mixture, and head for the hills. At the end of our street was where all the rolling cattle land started in Pinole, and it stretched all the way to the Carquinez Straits at that time without houses. The section of land where my horse ran around was large, miles long. And every day I would have no idea which direction to go to find her. She ran with a group of about 10 to 15 other horses, and I would just have to start out with a lucky guess. I would climb down into canyons and back up steep hillsides, walk along ridge tops and look in every direction. Sometimes I might see this little group on a far, far ridge and have to hike all the way there. Sometimes I'd be luckier and she would be closer. She was a horse that I rode with compromise. So her ideas and mine had to work together. Usually when I tried to catch her, the bag of grain was for me to shake, and she loved it, but she was very stubborn and she did not want to be caught. She wouldn't run away, but she would just keep walking around the other horses, and she knew that I would avoid the rear ends of the other horses, and some of the horses were biters, so I would have to avoid them. Others I could duck under their necks. But my little horse had a weakness, a habit, which was always her undoing. She never would walk when she defecated. So I would just keep her moving until the urge hit her. And then I could walk up to her, throw the reins over her neck, and that was it. She wouldn't resist. I'd feed her some grain and leap up on her bareback. This particular day that I want to share with you was exactly at this time of the year. And we were riding back on a ridge top. The grass was tall and green. The California poppies and the buttercups were out. The vetch was like a green tangle. And as we walked along, she made a change. And when you ride a horse bareback, you can feel with your legs what she's feeling, what she's thinking, what's coming next, if you pay attention. Well, with her, I could tell she was going to run, and she was going to run soon. So up went her head, shaking her head and her mane. Her tail was flashing back and forth, and she took off. And that was just fine with me. We ran and ran and ran along the ridgetop. It was beautiful. It was warm. The evening was coming, but it was still daylight on the ridgetop. The warm wind was blowing through my hair and through her hair, and we were riding together as a unit. We felt so good together. Then something changed again, and I knew she was up to something. She ran and circled around the end of this ridge top. And when she came back to her start, she started to kneel down with her front feet. And I thought, okay, here we go. She let me step off of her, and then she rolled to her back and kicked her legs up in the air and just squirmed on her back, just rolling and rolling and squirming. And so I did the same thing. What else would I do? When she was done, up she came, but she gave me a chance. So I got up, stood, and as she got up, I stepped back on. And there we were looking around. It was a perfect time. It was the happiest time. It was a time out of time. It was a moment that freezes right then, and you hold it forever, because will anyone ever believe you? Who knows? But it was the best time. And from there, we rode on back to the end of my dead-end street, where I had just enough time to take the halter off, give her a pat, and off she ran to go find the herd again. The end.
Oh, wow, Jane. Thank you so much. That was transporting. We've had cross-cultural communication and understanding. Now you gave us cross-species, total connection. Thank you. We've gotten a little behind. I mean, even we've had a few hiccups, so we're going to go to Ed now. Sometimes we take a little break, but tonight, let's everybody take your own break that you need to take so that we can hear all of our wonderful storytellers. And right now, that's Ed Lewis, who has his own story swap in Sacramento and also has been in this Zoom era coming to ours.
All right, thank you so much. After returning from combat duty during the Vietnam War, I experienced what is now known as post-traumatic stress syndrome. I was stationed for the next 18 months at Fort Lewis, Washington, which was only about 30 miles from where I grew up. Like many of the combat veterans coming back addicted to drugs like heroin, I began abusing drugs myself. My drug of choice was the powerful Black Beauty Speed, and I was soon just spiraling down into a deep depression. I went home one weekend and just poured my soul out to my mom, who held me, and I just felt that my father didn't respect me. He didn't love me. He never showed affection. I just wondered if he even liked me. My mother reiterated that in his generation, he was raised to show love by being a good provider, and he was a good provider. I needed more than that, though. So she arranged for a meeting. A week later, I showed up. I came into my father's den, the businessman. I couldn't look at him. I laid down on the couch. I looked up at the ceiling, and I tried to keep my emotions in and just give him a sense of what I was feeling in more of a business-like manner. But before long, the tears were just streaming, and I was sobbing uncontrollably. And when that happened, I was looking up at the ceiling, and the ceiling disappeared. And all I saw was this tunnel with gray folds in it. And I was floating in a beautiful liquid environment, which of course, a psychologist later told me I was back in the womb for protection. I poured out as much as I could, asked my father if he loved me, if he cared about me, that I just needed help and guidance. And I knew how he was going to respond, and I was dreading it. And I was finally finished. And he stood up, he came over and looked down at me and he said, "Son, it seems like you have deep emotional problems, and I have a friend who's a psychiatrist that can help you out." As soon as he said that, it felt like a knife was plunging deep into my heart and just turning around. I jumped up, said "F you" as loud as I could, and ran out of the house and didn't come back for a couple months. I got further into drug abuse and depression and was barely hanging on in the military. And one day I was walking across an open field. I was depressed. I was looking down. I had my hat in my hand. And all of a sudden I hear, "Soldier, look at your commanding officer. Put that hat on your head." And I looked up at him and I just snapped. I said, "F you, sir." And then I took off running. And fortunately, he didn't know me, and I was at another part of the base, and he hadn't seen my name tag, because I would have been court-martialed. And I'm sure they would have found out all about the drug abuse that I was experiencing. On one weekend home, my mother just said, "Please come here and let me explain something about your father to you." He said he was raised in the 20s and 30s. He was born in 1921. And when he was 3 years old, this is in Seattle, his mother smothered his 1-year-old baby brother. She probably had what is now known as postpartum depression. She was sent away to Red Deer, Alberta, Canada, where she had been born. And my father never saw her again. He didn't find out until in his 60s that she had went up there, and she spent the rest of her life in a mental hospital, and she died at the age of 55. She explained that my father was raised by a single dad who was very poor. He worked as a waiter. They barely had enough food to live on. He was very stoic. And my dad had to learn how to be totally self-sufficient. And like most of the men who were trained during that time period, he had to be self-sufficient to survive. But he also had to bury his emotions and never show any vulnerability. She wanted me to know this. And she said, "I know you, this is the 60s now, and I know you as a person, you're just more of a touchy-feely. You like to express your emotions. You're connecting with other guys. You can even hug and talk about your feelings. And this is something very foreign to your father. So when you met with him, couldn't really understand." Now, I've talked to him about that, and I would like you to come back next week and we'll have another conversation. I dreaded that and probably took more drugs again than I should have at that time. But I came home and my mother brokered us. She got us to communicating who we were. My father had a better understanding of me, and that I didn't have to be like him, and that I had differences that were okay. And same for me with him. I understood who he was, why he did what he did, and how he showed his love. He was a very good provider, and that's what he thought his job was. At the end of that meeting, we were even able to awkwardly hug each other. And over the years, our relationship deepened. And that moment was a freeing moment for me. It ended my drug addiction. I was able to just feel okay about myself, because we all need the love of people that are important in our lives. And my father was extremely important for me, along with my mother. I always knew I had my mother's love, but I just doubted my father's. But now I understood it. And my father lived to be 91. We were very different kinds of people. We had lots of discussions, but disagreements. But based on our understanding of each other, we could accept those differences. And I never saw his criticism as something negative. I just saw it as constructive criticism from his heart, and I could debate him about that. He lived to be 91, And again, our relationship got to a beautiful place. And we even got to where most every time we saw each other, we could hug each other, accept our differences. And I always knew his love and how proud he was of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. A story of reconciliation. Thank you. All right. Our next storyteller is, are you ready, Colleen? Great, Colleen Foley. So now we're going to hear some traditional stories coming up, starting with Colleen, who has so many times brought us wonderful, reminding us of the oldies and the goodies. Please tell us a story.
Okay, well, mine is a traditional story from German region. It was collected by the Brothers Grimm. And it's probably a story that you've all heard a lot. In fact, I was looking at my notes and I realized I told this story about 7 years ago. So I hope I don't bore you. Or you may all be new people. I don't know. It's called the Brenham Town Musicians. And it takes place. And there was this donkey. He worked many years for this man and for this poor family. He'd hauled things, he'd carried the children around, but they were a very poor family, and the donkey was getting to be very old. So the donkey got sort of a bad feeling. And then, sometimes animals can understand English, words, and we don't know that they do. They understand emotions. And so he was getting worried, and then he thought he saw the father go to a tanner, and he realized that since he wasn't helping the family anymore because he couldn't, because he was so old, he was going to be turned into a hide that they could sell. And he thought, oh no, I have to run away. So he ran away, and he thought, well, what can I do? He says, I can bray really loud. And he says, I'll go to Brenham Town where they have all the musicians. It's famous for their music. So I'll get a job there and I can survive in my old age. So he started on the road to Brenham Town. And he hadn't gone too far when he was walking by, and there was this dog lying at the side of the road. And the dog looked sort of dead at first, but then the dog started yawning, and he was just looked exhausted. And the donkey says, what's wrong? And the dog, who was a hound, said, I can't run fast enough to keep up with the hunt anymore. And I heard, and they stopped feeding me, and they just want me to do things I'm unable to do anymore. And the donkey said, I had a similar experience. So I ran away, and I'm going to Brenham Town to becoming musicians. I think we'd harmonize very well. So the hound dog said, oh yes, I think we will too. So they continued on the road to Brenham Town. And they hadn't gone too much further when they found this cat with some hair pulled out around her neck, and she had this terrible expression on her face. And they said, what's wrong? What happened to you? And the cat said, well, I'm not able to catch mice and rats anymore, and my mistress was going to drown me. And so I hissed and scratched, and I got away. Look, they had I got my collar off. And they said, oh, what a terrible story. We understand how you feel. And they told their stories. And they said, why don't you come with us to Brenham Town? So they kept going, and they got to a more rural area where there were farms and things. And so they saw this farm, and it was in the middle of the day. And in front of the barn for the farm was the rooster, and he was crowing just as loud, but it was the middle of the day. Roosters usually crow in the morning when the sun is coming up. And so they said, Rooster, what's wrong? And he says, my family is poor, and they couldn't afford, the mayor is coming over for dinner tonight, and they're going to make soup out of me. And I thought I'd just make one big song for the rest. And they said, well, we have, the donkey said, we have my brain, we have the dogs howling, and the cat knows night music, you can be our lead singer. So they said, come to Brennantown with us. So they continued on their way, and the sun started to go down and they started to get tired and hungry. Well, there was no food, and they'd always been fed by humans before, so they didn't know how to get food. So, but they did need rest. So the rest was calling. So there was a wood off the path started going through the woods. So they went off the path and found a big tree and decided to settle down for the night. Well, the donkey and the dog sat at the bottom of the tree. The cat climbed about halfway up, and the rooster was on top because that's where he felt the most comfortable. But the rooster saw he was so hungry he couldn't eat, but then in the distance, he saw a light. And he says, and he called down, there's a light, maybe there's a cabin, maybe there'll be some people who will feed us in just a little ways further on. And so they said, okay, that's a good idea. So they went to the cabin, and there was a party going on inside the cabin. So the donkey, who was the tallest, looked in the window of the cabin, and you know what he saw? He saw a whole table full of food and a bunch of robbers eating it. And it doesn't say how he knew they were robbers, but they were robbers. And he says, and they said, well, we can't just, and so he told all the other animals, and they said, we have a plan. So what happened was the donkey put his hooves on the windowsill. The dog climbed and sat on the donkey's back. The cat sat on the dog's back, and the rooster sat on the cat's head. And then at the signal, they all started singing at the same time. The donkey brayed, the dog barked, the cat screeched, and the rooster crowed. And it was so loud, the window broke, and the robbers got scared and ran off into the woods. So they got their dinner. And so they ate, and it made them very tired. So they finished the dinner off, and they'd been very hungry. So they went and they ate, and then they were tired, and they thought, well, and animals, sometimes they don't worry about things. So they said, we're tired. This is a comfortable place. Let's just sleep here. So and it was in the time when people used straw for their rugs. So there was no rug. So the donkey decided to lay down in the straw. The dog hid behind the door because that was where he was comfortable. The cat curled up by the fire, which was going out. There's only a couple embers left. And the rooster went up to the roof beams, and he settled down there, and they went to sleep. Well, the robbers, having egos, they said, how could we have been, what was that horrible thing that happened? I didn't look back. Did you see what happened? They said, no. Well, we have to go back and claim the rest of our dinner. So that they planned. So the head robber asked one of his robbers to go in the house, but it was all dark by then. So he opened the door and snuck in, and he looked over at the fireplace, and he saw 2 ambers. So he took a stick and stuck it, except it wasn't an amber. It was the cat's eyes reflecting the moonlight. So he stuck the stick in the cat's eye, and the cat got really angry and scratched his arm. And so he backed up into behind the door, and the dog bit his leg. And then he went over by the table, and he got kicked, I won't say where, by the donkey. And all this time the rooster was yelling commands from the ceiling. Well, he got scared, and he ran out, and he went to and the head of the robber said, what did you find there? And he says, that house is haunted by a terrible, terrible witch. I went in, she scratched me, see, with her fingernails. I stepped back, one of her assassins stabbed me in the leg with a knife. Then someone else, another one of her assassins, hit me with a pillar, kept hitting me with a pillar. And then the ringleader on top was screaming commands, kill him at every end. So I barely got out of there alive. So the robbers never went back to their hideout in the woods, and the animals lived there for the rest of their days, happily. Thank you, Brothers Grimm.
Thank you, Brothers Grimm, and thank you, Colleen. Lovely. Teamwork, teamwork.
Yes.
All right. Our next storyteller is Andre Wilson. Please welcome Andre. So always wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here. A long time ago, there were three Irishmen who knew nothing about America. They didn't even know how to speak English. Not having any money, they stowed away aboard a catapult from Ireland. Arriving in America, they had no means of getting around. So they fell in with a group of hobos, and they all together hitched a ride in the empty boxcars of a train. Now the three Irishmen watched as the hobos on the train played the dice game of craps. The hobos would be rolling the dice, and someone would roll a 3, and the hobos would shout out, "We three!" Because this is one of the type of lingo of dice playing. So the Irishmen watching heard that phrase, "We three," over and over again. And they figured that phrase had to be very important. So they kept that phrase in their mind, "We three," in case they could use it for later. Well, the person shooting craps, he finally rolled a 6. And the person betting against him said in a real low voice, "6 months in the county jail." That was just a slang term among crap shooters. And he said this real low, but with emphasis, to the point where the three Irishmen figured out that they only caught the part 6 months. And they figured that phrase, 6 months, had to be very important. So they kept that phrase in mind, 6 months. Finally, the person shooting dice rolled a 7 and lost. And the person betting against him said, "Pay me my money." Oh, the man refused, and they got into an argument. And the Irishman watching this didn't understand what was going on. They just observed. And finally, the person who had won the bet said, "Pay me my money or I'll kill you." And the man who lost the bet was very dismissive. And he said, "The quicker the better." The three Irishmen watching this didn't understand what was going on, but they knew there was some type of commotion or fight. But they did grab that one phrase that they didn't understand called "the quicker the better." And they kept that phrase in mind. Oh, well, right now, although the hobos on that rail car knew that there was going to be a fight, and everybody got real quiet. Even the Irishmen felt that there was something dangerous that was about to happen, and they backed away and sat in the corner of the rail car. Well, the man who won the bet, he slashed the throat of the gambler, and he, boom, died right there in the rail car. The three Irishmen didn't know what was going on, but the other hobos on that car, they knew that if they were in that car when the train arrived at the next town, the police will find that body and assume that one of them committed that murder. And even then, they could all be arrested because you're all riding the rails illegally. So one by one, two by two, the hobos jumped off the train while it was still moving. Well, the hobos knew how to jump off a moving train. They just jump and they roll around safely. And the hobos watching this not hobos, the three Irishmen watching this knew nothing about jumping off of rail cars. They thought this is the way that Americans ride trains. So they stayed in the corner of that rail car. By and by, the train arrived at the next town. And the police went up and down the rail yard, checking the boxcars to see if there were any hobos to be arrested and put to work. And the officers came to the boxcar of the three Irishmen and saw them inside and said, "Come on out." And the three Irishmen didn't understand what he was saying. And so the police climbed aboard the rail car, and when they did, they saw the dead body lying right there on the floorboards of that rail car. And the police interrogated the three Irishmen and said, "Who did this?" Now, the three Irishmen only knew of three phrases in English. We three, 6 months, and the quicker the better. So all at once, the three Irishmen said, "We three." Police said, "Come on out of there," and motioned to the three Irishmen. And they came out of the rail car and stood in front of the rail car, and the police irritated them. The police could tell by the way they looked and talked that they were immigrants. So the police asked, "How long have you been in the United States?" Now the three Irishmen, they only knew of several phrases in English. So they said, 6 months. And so the police arrested them and took them to jail and had the judge come around and take a look at them. Well, by and by, the three Irishmen were brought to trial. And at the court, where they were not provided with either a lawyer nor a translator, the police officer, the arresting police officer, spoke. "Your Honor, gentlemen of the jury, when I came upon that rail car and saw the dead body of that poor defenseless hobo lying inside, and I asked those three defendants who killed this poor man, the three confessed, we three. When I asked them how long they've been in the United States, they said 6 months. The thing is, though, that wasn't entirely true because they had only been in America for only just 3 measly days. By not having an interpreter, they could not tell this to the jury. And so the jury of all white male Protestants convicted the three Irishmen. And the judge said, "I have no other alternative than to sentence you three to death by hanging at dawn." In the morning, the jailer came to their cell with a platter loaded with the last meal of fried chicken with all the fixings. He gave the tray of food to the Irishman, who ate it greedy because this is the best meal they ever had since he'd been in this country. And then the jailer led them out towards the scaffold. And he overheard the three Irishmen speaking with their strange language. And he only heard a couple of phrases in English that he understood. They were saying, "We fee in 6 months." So the jailer hauled off and pushed them towards the scaffold and said, "We're going to hang you." And the three Irishmen all said at once, "The quicker the better." And so the three Irishmen were hung. And it turns out they knew too much after all. They knew just enough about America to get hung. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Did you tell me where you found that story? I can't remember what you
Yes.
told me about it.
I bought this. This is an old book my mother had. It's all falling apart. It's called American Negro Folk Tales. I found it disintegrating in her storage unit. It was collected by Richard Dorson, and the story was told by originally a black Arkansan named John Blackamore, who moved from Arkansas to Michigan, where he worked at the foundries there. That was where he was interviewed. And the thing is, he told the story in like when he was 30 years old, in around 1955. And it's a story about how immigrants were treated in America. Falsely accused of murder, not provided with a lawyer, being convicted by an all-white jury. And this is a story that resonated with me based upon what has happened to African Americans in our country for a long time, and also what's happening right now today in our country. And it just so happened to be of all the stories you can put in this book, this is the very, very last story. The very last story in the entire collection. I want 300 pages or so. The very last story. So it's quite something that. And another thing too is that this story has been around the world in various versions. There's a version in Britain going back to the 14th century, in which the Walloons, they're like an ethnic group from Belgium, they would travel over to England, and of course they didn't know the language, and they would bungle their way and say three phrases in English that would get themselves executed. And the story is also, there are many versions around the world, but also in Dominica, they have their own version of the story in which three French-speaking Haitians go over to a Spanish-speaking Dominica, and they bungle their way into getting themselves hung by saying like these three phrases. So it's a story that's been told in multiple cultures and multiple languages, basically about a noodle character, a fool, who bungled their way into getting hung. And this is a superb version by John Blackmore with lots of details that I didn't find in the other versions I had read. They were just very brief, but this was a very ornate type of storytelling.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've had cross-cultural understanding and cross-cultural misunderstanding.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Fabulous
We've
book. I
got-
bought it for like 25 cents, and it was one of the first folktale books I ever bought. Fabulous stories.
All right. Good, good, good. Our next storyteller, Bobby Kincaid, is going to tell one of her unique versions of the traditional story.
Yeah. Hello, it's Bobby. I'm going to tell you Sita, who slayed the worms. It's from China, and I told it in the Asian Art Museum, and it goes along with my battle with facing what I can do. Okay. About in the 2nd century in China, when the Black Emperor, the Black Dragon, had been killed, for 200 years there was war, and these different countries were coming in to settle China. Well, Sita lived on a farm with her father. They did rice, and she had 6 daughters, and he had 6 daughters and no sons. So Sita was up in the mountain with her sisters working in the rice field, and they were looking down at the road, and here came a sorceress all dressed in silks and finely stitched garments, and the magistrate dressed the same way, pulling a cart. They were bowing to the parents, and the parents were bowing back to them, and her older sister was there. And Sita yelled out, "I'll never, ever be given to that worm. Well, the mother and father gave 8 bags of rice to the magistrate and the sorceress, and they left. Well, Sita, who was 9 years old, the next morning at breakfast, she said to her father, Father, I want to come with you into the fields and do the dance. And his father looked at her. No, 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 that's a guard dance and it's only for men. Her mother looked at the husband and she said, well, you don't have any sons and Sita would be a really good companion with you out there. So he allowed it. And every morning she'd get up very, very early and do the dance with her father. Well, the second daughter and the third daughter and the fourth daughter, there wasn't enough rice for them because the rain god, the rain dragon, hadn't given enough rain. So they had to walk by foot clear over the hills into the next valley so that they wouldn't be given to the worm. And as it happened for the fifth daughter, there was enough rain. And so she was saved by, they had to spend 12 bags of rice for her. And Sita was watching this the whole time. And she had to clean out the rice shed. Her year was coming up. So she went to the rice shed to clean it up. And under the stacks of empty rice bags was a sword. It was her father's sword. So she started getting up really early in the morning and practicing with that sword. And she was getting very good. But one day her mother said, those rats are really big out in the shed. They're just tearing up those bags. Well, Sita got very, very good at this. And her time was up. It was the 10th month and it was 2 or 3 days before the 8th. And she stood up at the dinner table and she said, Father, I am going to slay the worm and I will have the reward given to you and the sisters for their dowries. And the father looked at her and he said, no daughter of mine is going to do anything of the sort. You just go to your room and you stay there. Well, Lychee, she went up and closed the door and the sisters knocked and came in. Well, what she was doing, she's putting on her dirtiest clothes, her dirtiest boots, and she'd taken her spread off of her bed and she wrapped it around her and she said, I'll be back. And they all hugged her up and kissed her up and cried. She went to the shed and she got her father's sword. And in there she found some rice cakes and she said, oh, thank you, Mom. So she started down the trail and she came to the sorceress house. The sorceress had come in years ago and said that this worm, who was supposedly 80 feet long, wider than 2 barrels of rice and had hundreds of teeth, needed a maiden on the 10th month and the 8th day to appease him, or he'd come down and eat the farmers and the animals and a couple of magistrates. So Sita pounded on her door and she says, I'm here. And the sorceress says, what? She says, I'm here to claim the reward and I'm going to slay the worm. And she says, oh, I don't think so. She says, yes, I am. And this is what I want. I want a large pot. I want honey for the pot, I want rice for the pot, and I want a flintstone, and I want a silk gown and some leather boots. And the sorcerer looked at her and said, well, go back into that room over there, and when the magistrate comes in the morning, we'll discuss it. So Lychee went back in the room, and of course it was locked. Well, while she was in there, she prayed to the orange dragon, the green dragon, the white one, the rain dragon, the weather dragon, and the black dragon, every dragon she knew, and she practiced with her sword. Well, the next morning she heard a dog growling, and when she went there, the dog was after the sorceress, and she said, no, I'll take the dog with me. So the magistrate who had knocked on the door let her have the dog, and he says, I brought you a bowl, an iron pot, which was cracked. He says, I have honey. It was moldy. And he says, and here's some rice. It was moldy. And he said, here's a flintstone. Well, it was pretty tiny. And he said, you don't get a gown and you don't get any leather boots because you won't be coming back. And he kind of scuffed off. Well, Sita, she wrapped all this stuff up and she took the dog. And the sorcerer said, I'm coming with you. Well, Sita hurried as fast as she could so that nobody would follow her, especially the sorceress. And they started climbing up this steep mountain, and it was slimy because, the worms slide down to eat. Well, she got to the top and it smelled terrible. It smelled like rancid fat and rotten meat. And I got clear to the top. She'd picked up little sticks along the way. And there was a temple with 4 columns. It didn't have a roof, but there was a cave entrance. And in the cave entrance was this smelly, snoring worm. It was maybe 20 feet long, had 100 teeth, but it was not a very pleasant sight. The dog crouched down to watch the worm, and Lychee, she laid out the sticks, she put the pot on it, she put the honey in the pot, and then she put the rice in and stirred it up. Then she lit the fire with the flintstone, and it started cooking, and it started to smell really good. It smothered the smell from the horrible worm. Well, the worm smelled this finally, and he came charging out of the cave right to that pile of hot honey on that hot fire, and it burnt him. Well, while this was happening, the dog jumped on him, was chewing on his neck, and Lychee got her sword and she just whacked that worm once. That's for my sister. And she whacked it 4 more times, and she said, this is for my other sisters. And she whacked on it, and she says, it's for the maidens. And then 1 whack, and that worm turned over and no breath was left, and the dog growled at him. And they stood there for about a minute, stunned by what happened. And she says, we got to pick up all the bones of the maidens because they need to be buried. They need their peace. And so she picked up the bones and she wrapped them in her bed sheet again. And she went down the mountains, getting pretty dark now, and she slipped in, but she made it with the dog. The sorcerer was gone. Nothing was left. And she finally got home. She knocked on the door, and they were all so surprised to see her. And she said, I did it. I slayed the worm. Dad, we have to tell the farmers I got all the maidens' bones. So they went to the city marketplace, and he rang the bell, and all the farmers came, and they picked up different bones so they could bury their daughters. Well, a couple of weeks later, the quote king came, who owned that whole area where the farmers worked, and he said to Lychee, well, you can be one of my queens. She said, no, I don't want that. I want dowries for my sisters and a dowry for myself, which he did very happily, being glad the worm was gone. And she lived with her father, and then finally she married a farmer in the next valley and lived happily. And to this day in China, there is a song about her legend and how she was helpful in getting worms out of China. And thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. So we are later than we usually run, but we have Bertha Riley. I hope, Bertha, you're ready to tell us a little short story. And then we'll close up. And I'm just going to say, if anybody wants to stay later, I have a story I can share, but we're going to end with Bertha, and everybody who needs to leave can leave. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Liz. I look forward to hearing your story.
I promised Bertha. Yeah, I mean, Bertha said she wanted to hear my story, so she's going to stay. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I call this the story of life. And some of us who are older will understand more of it. All right. A group of 40-year-old girlfriends discussed where they would meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed they would meet at the Ocean View restaurant because the waiters there were wonderfully looking and had tight pants and nice buns. 10 years later, at age 50, the friends once again discussed where they should meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed that they would meet at the Ocean View restaurant because the food was really good and the wine selection was excellent. 10 years later, at age 60, the friends again discussed where they should meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed that they would meet at the Ocean View restaurant. because they could dine in peace and quiet, and the restaurant had a beautiful view of the ocean. 10 years later, at age 70, the friends discussed where they should meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed that they would meet at the Ocean View restaurant. Because they had good disabled parking, it was wheelchair accessible, and it had an elevator. 10 years later, at 80 years of age, the friends again discussed where they would meet for lunch. And they agreed that they would meet at the Ocean View restaurant because many of them thought that they'd never been there before. Okay.
Okay, everybody, let's all unmute ourselves. And we are going to officially close. Sally is gonna wrap us up, and then whoever wants to stay on, we could have some announcements, and I'll tell this story that I promised I would tell. I promised Bertha I would tell.
Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone.
Hello.
And we're only going to have to wait a month.
Andre, could you please put the author and name of the book that you got your story from? It was
Oh, sure.
wonderful.
Liz, do you want me to stop the recording? Or will you take care of it?
I think
You'll
if
do
we're
it?
going to chat for a while, sure, let's stop the recording.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Listen to Liz's story.